BRICS event. The BRIC chambers and our partner for this event, FIDIL, the Voice of Luxembourg Industry, are very proud to welcome you. The topic of the event is BRIC and Luxembourg Manufacturing Partnership. I'm Olga Hausinger. I'm director at LRBC, Russian Luxembourg Business Chamber, and audit director in Deloitte, and I will be hosting this event tonight. So we have dedicated this event to manufacturing because we believe manufacturing is key to economic success. We find that there are many opportunities to invest in manufacturing in BRIC countries and also for BRIC countries to invest in manufacturing all over the world, in Luxembourg also. We believe that Luxembourg is a perfect place to facilitate investments into manufacturing. Well, the agenda of the event is as follows. So first we had registration and welcoming cocktail. Now, traditionally, we will invite on stage the presidents of the chambers who give their views on BRIC and manufacturing. After that, Mr. Charles-Louis Ackermann will have a presentation. He's the vice president of FIDIL. Next item on the agenda is the speech of the Minister of Finance, Pierre Gramegna. Unfortunately, he is not able to come, so our apologies for that. After that, the chairman of the board of ArcelorMittal, Michel Wurf, will give a speech about contribution of Luxembourg to ArcelorMittal's successful development. And then we will finish the event with a panel that will be moderated by Jean-Paul Ollinger. And after that, we will all enjoy the cocktail with the cuisine of BRIC countries. Then, before we go to the official part of the agenda, I would like to thank you, our sponsors, without whom this event would not be possible. It's BNP Paribas, and we're here in this all wonderful auditorium. And then our sponsors, it's Deloitte, East West United Bank, KPMG, Intertrust, and GSK Stockman. So warm applause for our sponsors. Yes. Now I would like to invite on stage the presidents of the BRIC chambers. So it's Laertes Bouchard for Brazil, please. Anton Baturin for Russia. Then Sudhir Kohli for India. And Ms. King for China Lux, please. Yes. So we will have a presentation of the speech of each of the presidents. Laertes, you always the first one because Brazil is the first in the abbreviation of BRIC. So if you could please share with us your views on BRIC manufacturing. So,
thank you very much. Okay, this is working. Your Excellencies, the dignitaries of China, Russia, India, and Brazil, Mr. Gramegna, who presented excuses, thank you for your presence in our event. As we speak here, Brazil is hosting the actual BRICS event in Brazil, in parallel. The BRICS is a supranational organization of chiefs of state, finance ministers, and central bank presidents of those countries. So, at this very same moment, we have in Brazil all the 5 chiefs of state of our respective countries, where the host is Mr. Bolsonaro. We have there and now Mr. Putin, Mr. Ping, Mr. Modi, and Mr. Ramaphosa. It is always important to remind that the BRICS countries hold 41% of the world population, and in 2018, they had a combined GDP of 18 trillion US dollars, about 30% of the world GDP, and about 27% of the world's surface. This is to give a notion of the scale of what BRICS actually mean. In this context, Luxembourg can be helpful as a stability platform of financial services for these countries. They want to produce their own independent financial stability mechanisms. And the BRICS are walking fast on this direction. In a sense, these financial platforms want to compete with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and other international platforms of financial stability. Within this scope, the digital economy and the fight against transnational crime are the priorities of the BRICS Brazil meeting now. Our BRIC meeting here in Luxembourg wants to talk about industry, and it is a good initiative. Healthy financial markets typically mirror real assets in the real world. Still about industry, the Brazilian experience makes very clear that education is at the core of competitiveness in any sector of the economy, but the industrial sector is particularly sensitive to the education of workers. Brazil is a worldwide phenomenon where you can find industries of the 5 continents coexisting in healthy competition. Apart from that, I wish to mention the very good quality of the relations between Brazil and China with President Bolsonaro. In 10 months, the Brazilian president visited China 2 times, in May and October. Both countries signed various agreements to facilitate business in agriculture, infrastructure, and energy. President Bolsonaro abolished visa requirements for Chinese citizens. President Bolsonaro invited personally the Prime Minister Xi Jinping to participate in the auction of licenses for oil and gas exploration in Brazil. China is the prime investor of many economic activities in Brazil, and this ambience of prosperity and happiness is mutually beneficial. 3 words I wanted to learn to say today: Xing Fu, meaning happiness, Chang Gong for success, and Fan Rong for prosperity. The purpose of President Bolsonaro is to reestablish the world's confidence in Brazil, so investors can find a safe environment for investments there. Brazil has a focus on the effective liberalization of the economy to facilitate business according to the rules of a free market. The Minister of Economy in Brazil, Paulo Guedes, is a liberal economist, and the Minister of Science, Marcos Pontes, is an astronaut. He visited personally the International Space Station in a Russian Soyuz rocket launched from Baikonur. India is also a big partner of Brazil with enormous exchanges in agribusiness commodities. The BRICS group was a major opportunity of improvement in the relations between India and Brazil. In 2016, the BRICS meeting held in India took place in Goa, a Portuguese legacy in India. Brazil understood the love message, and the relationship is only getting better. Now, I would like to give you a list of accomplishments in Brazil, but I decided not to do so because other important speakers are waiting for us. For short, Brazil is back to business in a functional environment. President Bolsonaro supports the BRICS initiative, and Brazil is welcoming any country that comes in goodwill. Please notice the LBBC Business Initiative available at your service in Luxembourg. Visit our website, become our member, come to our events. Feel free to talk to me or any of our representatives during the cocktail. Thanks for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Laertes. Now it's Anton Baturin who will speak. Anton is our new president of the Luxembourg Russian Business Chamber, and well, it's a welcome speech of Anton.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Laertes, for this very detailed analysis of the BRICS relationships. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it freut mich ich bei diesem Event begrüßen zu dürfen. Und das ist eine große Ehre für mich, für uns hier zu schwätzen. My name is Anton Baturin. I'm a lawyer and a partner at Wilson Associates, and I've been on the board of the Russia-Luxembourg Business Chamber since its creation in 2005, and now I have an honor to represent it as its newly elected president. I just wanted to use this opportunity to thank Katya Volatovskaya, who has been steering our chamber for the last 7 years, and we were discussing out there that 7 is a lucky number, so I hope this luck will pass on to me and to all the activities we continue. So we are committed to developing the business relationships, but also economic, cultural, and scientific relationships between our two countries, Luxembourg and Russia. And we are convinced that the people's and business diplomacy plays a huge role in overcoming the often officially created barriers in relationships. That many of you here just shows how important the work of our and our colleagues' chambers is. And I would like to welcome you to this fourth BRIC event, which is dedicated to the manufacturing partnership between our countries. Russia is one of the leading countries in the world in terms of the industrial production and manufacturing output, which contributes more than 30% of the GDP of the country. A big part of it is energy sector, including atomic energy, which is closely followed by chemical industry, machine manufacturing and engineering, aviation, transport, and food. Luxembourg and Russia have quite a long history of business relationship, but more importantly, quite a successful one, with entrepreneurs from Luxembourg and Russia finding opportunities in our two countries for the business development. So far, our relationship in terms of trade has been focused mainly on plastics, rubber, machinery equipment, and engineering, metals, and minerals. But I'm convinced that there are plenty of other areas where we could develop our business relationship and cooperation. I'll cut my welcome speech short to allow the other speakers to welcome you as well. So we're happy to see all of you here. Thank you for coming and enjoy the event. Thank you.
Anton, Sudhir, you came back as the president of the Indian Business Chamber. Could you please tell us, it was your idea to dedicate this event to manufacturing, and in your speech I know that you will cover it.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Indian Business Chamber of Luxembourg and its board members, I welcome you all here. As you already know, BRIC is an acronym for the developing nations of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. It is estimated by international trade bodies that in the next 25 to 30 years, based on the current trends, China and India are poised to become dominant global suppliers of manufactured goods and services respectively. Likewise, Brazil and Russia have the capacity to expand its market share as suppliers of raw materials. Now, to answer the question that Olga said, in one of the analyses, the imports and exports of the European Union with the BRIC nations from bulk of overall EU exports to BRIC nations is about 90% of the total exports. And these are the manufactured goods that are exported out of Europe to different countries. That's the reason. So the share of the manufactured goods is 78% for India, 95% for the rest of BRIC countries. Therefore, clearly, there is a greater potential to export manufactured goods to India. Except for India, EU has trade deficits with all BRIC countries. This shows that bilateral relationship between Europe and India is mutually beneficial. India is equally interested in trade with Europe as is Europe with India. As per the European Commission, EU is India's largest trading partner, accounting for euros 92 billion worth in trade of goods in 2018, or 12.9% of the total Indian trade, ahead of China, that's 10.9%, and USA 10.1%. EU's share in foreign investment in inflows to India more than doubled from 8% to 18% in the last decade, making EU the largest foreign investor in India. EU foreign direct investment stocks in India amounted to euros 73 billion in 2016, which is significant but way below EU foreign investment stocks in China, which is about 178 billion. The Indian economy is essentially service-led, supported by exports. Profitability of EU FDI in Russia and Brazil is somewhat lower, 11.3% and 11.8% respectively, which is similar to the returns on FDI in most of the profitable new member states. With returns on FDI exceeding 18% in India, India emerges as by far the most profitable location among BRICS for EU firms. India is currently one of the world's largest growing large economy. India represents a sizable and dynamic market with an annual GDP growth rate of around average 7%, and it is an important player in the global economic governance as well. India is an important trade and investment partner for the EU. The opportunities in India in infrastructure areas are immense. If one looks at the national highways in India, they only constitute to about 5% of the network. Modernization and new construction of airports, ports, railways are happening at a rapid rate. Power shortage and transmission and distribution losses are areas that need attention and investment. Food processing as well as agriculture industries are booming because of the needs of the thriving population of over 1.3 billion. Overall, to conclude, I would like to say that the EU, Luxembourg, and India also share an interest in sustaining a rules-based multilateral trading system with World Trade Organization at its center. The multilateral trading system has been instrumental in integrating the global economy and bringing the two regions closer economically. Thank you, and I wish you a fruitful evening and enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhir. Madam King, if you could please, you are new president of China Lux, if you could please introduce yourself and China Lux to us.
Dear distinguished guests, dear Chairman of the BRICS Chamber of Commerce, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the new president of China Lux, China Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce. As most of you know, we provide a supporting role in bilateral trade and cultural ties between China and Luxembourg. We also organize events on different topics to create links between different communities. Last Friday, we have just successfully organized a high-tech and economic forum with Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce in China, Nanjing, and Zhengzhou. I'm very proud that the Brazilian, Russian, Indian, and the Chinese Chamber of Commerce are doing this fourth edition of BRIC event, this time dedicated to the manufacturing. Now, the manufacturing might not be the first thing that comes to mind when you think about the relationship between Luxembourg and the BRIC countries, but it is an important one. And I'm sure that after the various speeches and the panel discussion in this evening, we will better understand why. I will keep my speech short as we all want to listen to the specialist. I hope that will be more wonderful event organized jointly by BRIC Chambers of Commerce and the other chambers. We are all better and stronger when we join forces. Enjoy the evening and enjoy the food, drink afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, warm applause to the presidents. Now it's time for the speech of Mr. Charlie Ackerman, the Vice President of FIDIL, our partner for the event, and also Chairman of the Board of Akuma Lux Group that has successful investments into Russia.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Someone said the problem with a speech isn't so much not knowing when to stop as knowing when not to begin. However, I was asked to say a few words, so allow me to start. And as I was given 10 minutes, you know when it's finished. Luxembourg's industry looks back to a long history of active trading partnerships with members of the BRIC states. One of the most significant of such partnerships in the early days was without doubt the establishment of a subsidiary company of Luxembourg's steelmaker Arbeit in Brazil's city of Sabara. This was in 1921, almost 100 years ago, by the foundation of the Companhia Siderúrgica Belgo-Mineira. I hope it was right, otherwise Michel Wirth will correct me. Arbeit became ArcelorMittal, and while the group is still headquartered in Luxembourg, we are of course all aware of the company's Indian roots and its very strong presence in China and Russia. It is no doubt that this traditional heavy industry opened trade allies to Luxembourg industry with BRIC states over the course of the last century. To name only the most prominent companies, I think of Paul Wirth, providing solutions for integrated steelmaking. I think of IEE, today under Chinese leadership, developing sensing solutions for the automotive industry, or Ceratizit, producing hard material cutting solutions. There is also SEBI, manufacturing electromechanical components for the automotive industry, or Rotarex, realizing complex valves and fittings, all companies being active in one or more of the BRIC member states. Akuma Lux opened a fast-growing production site for battery sets 6 years ago in Russia, close to the city of Samara. Luxembourg company Amasil, already producing in China, started 2 years ago manufacturing battery separators in India. And there are several other economic actors in Luxembourg that by now have roots with or in a BRIC state. In proportion to other countries, it appears that links between Luxembourg and BRIC countries is impressively high. I believe Luxembourg's industry has still opportunities to further intensify economic ties with BRIC states. We are therefore open to explore trade, and when I say we, I represent FIDIL tonight. We are therefore open to explore trade and investment opportunities that foster additional long-term economic partnerships. We further believe that some of them will contribute to tackle the climate challenge. While EU's climate actions are ambitious, we need, in my sense, to integrate climate-related elements carefully and beforehand into our international trading routes. Climate change mitigation is a global challenge that can only be resolved if supported by all globally trading stakeholders. This is another yet important subject. The President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, said that China will continue to adopt multiple measures to advance the reform and opening of its financial sector so that its financial market can better adapt to financial modernization and globalization. These are not sayings, but already accomplished strategies. 25 years ago, BRIC member states represented 10% of the world's GDP. Today, this number has shifted. It was said before by Mr. Bush at 30%, while I have written to over 25%, but I think it's somewhere in between. So today, this number of the GDP is shifted to over 25% and is realized by 3 billion people. And if some argue this would sometimes happen in a more economical than social way, eventually, I believe, this is the route to success for most of them. We have not to forget that in a way Luxembourg followed an identical route in the early 19th century. Now, as Thomas Edison said, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. Ladies and gentlemen, we will not give up cultivating our exchanges with BRIC member states, and I am positive that events such as the one we are holding here today will help to further forge those very partnerships needed to successfully lead us into the next decades of prosperous trade between BRIC states and Luxembourg. I all wish you a very successful event. Thank you.
Thank you, Cher-Louis. Then for the ones who came a little bit later, then our next item on the agenda is the speech of the Minister of Finance. Then unfortunately he informed us that he could not come. Then we move to the next item on the agenda, is the speech of Mr. Michel Wurf, Chairman of ArcelorMittal. Please.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, I cannot speak in the name of Finance Minister Pierre Gramegna, who, by the way, is a good friend of mine, because we have worked quite a lot for almost more than 10 years together, when he was my Director General at the time when I was Chairman of the Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce. And it was also through that time that I learned to very much about the BRIC countries, about the initiatives of the different chambers, and maybe as a start I would really like to congratulate you for what you have organized, and also the fact that the four chambers are really working together, are inviting people from different countries, and are really trying to bring forward through that also friendship and cooperation between Luxembourg and the BRIC countries. And I think that you know that Luxembourg is today, I think it's the only country in the world where the number of residents who don't have the national passport almost equals 50% of the population. So it's really an international platform, and through events like the ones we have today, it's clearly that it's also a way to live together, to discuss together, and to make progress together. So I won't speak to you about finance, but I will speak a little bit to you about steel, and Cher-Louis Carlo Ackermann already has spoken about this. And in fact, the subject I wanted to bring it from two different angles, starting from the fact that you know that, and he mentioned it, that ArcelorMittal today has its global headquarters here in Luxembourg, but Luxembourg also as a country has become really a wealthy country due to the emergence of the steel industry. And hence, I want to speak about the subject of tonight from the angle, first of all, of the Luxembourg steel industry, which is not totally the same than ArcelorMittal, because the Luxembourg steel industry today only represents 2 or 3% of what ArcelorMittal represents in the world. And then in the second point of my speech, I would like to tell you a little bit ArcelorMittal and the BRIC countries and what can be improved, and where also you as distinguished representatives from the 4 countries can help to improve the relationship and deepen the cooperation between Luxembourg, between big companies, and also between the BRIC countries. So I start with the beginning of Luxembourg. The beginning of Luxembourg was 1839, so a little bit more than 175 years ago. And at that moment, Luxembourg was a very poor country. It was in fact a country which was with a lot of emigration, because the country was not ready or was not in a position to create enough or to produce enough food for a growing population. And hence, the consequence of that is that, for example, today there are more Luxembourg-based people, for example, living today in the United States than living through Luxembourg, living in Luxembourg. And at that moment, when Luxembourg became independent, and when the king of that period was thinking, how can I transform Luxembourg, his first decision was, in fact, to try to sponsor in order to make Luxembourg open. And he asked, and he wanted then to propose that Luxembourg would become member of the so-called German Zollverein, which was a big custom union with Germany, that was continental Europe, the biggest market, in order to give Luxembourg economic agents the possibility to grow, to move, and to exchange. And I think that's the first idea and the first link also, which was also the idea of the BRIC countries. At that moment, the steel industry did not yet be a significant part of the economy, because at that moment, first of all, it was not very known that the south of the country hosted a lot of iron ore reserves. And second, the iron ore reserves in Luxembourg had one negative feature, in the sense that they had to contain a lot of phosphorus. And at that moment, there was no technology to transform phosphorus iron ore into modern steel making. And it was only in the 70s, so in 1870s, that there was an Englishman, English people, Wilfred Thomas, who made an invention and who took a patent, so intellectual property, another subject, I will come back to that later on, who made it possible to transform phosphor iron ore into modern and good high-quality steel. And it was Luxembourg entrepreneurs who said, this is fantastic, this will be the boom for Luxembourg. And since the 1870s, the steel industry started to grow in an exponential way, and almost for 100 years, so from 1870 up to 1970 years, almost for 100 years, first of all, Luxembourg grew very rapidly. The steel industry created the wealth of the population. Luxembourg was no longer a country of immigration, but became a country of immigration, and Luxembourg became very international. And there already the BRIC countries became very important in this economic history. The best example, obviously, is the one you already mentioned. That was it was Luxembourg engineers who became the first investors, and the first they built the Brazilian steel industry. And when you see today almost what characterizes more Brazil, I think it's iron ore with Vale and it is steel. And today, indeed, ArcelorMittal is the largest steel producer still in Brazil. It started indeed in Sabara, but then it was also in Monlevade. And that, and in fact, the beginning of the steel industry was because the Luxembourg steel industry was saying there is much better iron ore in Brazil than is available in Luxembourg. And the initial idea was to buy properties and to make investments in Brazil in order to bring in iron ore to Europe. And for that reason was created and was bought a big land in the port of Ghent in Belgium. And that was basically initially thought that there could be an import of iron ore in order to be then consumed in Europe. Today, the land in Ghent has been used to build a new integrated steel plant, one of the first integrated maritime steel plants, and one of the most, I would say, the most performing steel plant in Europe, today still belonging to ArcelorMittal, and which was developing there starting in the 60s of the 20th century into a high sophisticated producer of rolled sheet, mainly for the automotive industry. And at that moment, the automotive industry, or the sheet for the automotive industry, the market was divided between the British ones, the Brits, the Germans, the French, and there was no big market for it. And it was that reason then that our group, so Arbet, we were trying to develop new markets for these sheets. And the first of these big markets was the Russian automotive industry. And hence, from the 60s, 70s on, for 20 or 30 years, a lot of hot rolled, but mainly cold rolled, high quality steels served to produce the Russian cars, the Ladas, and so on, which were developing ourselves. And I could give a little bit more other examples of where we had worked as a steel industry, also together with other BRIC countries, like with Russia. You were mentioning Paul Wirth. Paul Wirth was part of the ArcelorMittal group up to 2013, and by the way, still the chairman also of Paul Wirth, so I can a little bit tell. And in fact, a lot of Luxembourg-made technology was made available to the Russian steel industry, but also to the Chinese steel industry, and later on to the Indian steel industry, in order to, and obviously Brazilian steel industry, in order to help that these countries became today major steel players in the world. But what learned Luxembourg in its development, and I would like maybe later on to make some parallels, and that was, first of all, the development was only possible because of the existence of free trade. The development was only possible because there was a good state of law of intellectual property, and I was telling us Luxembourg steel industry was buying this intellectual property from Thomas for this steel process, but also, for example, what makes today one of the big Luxembourg specialties in steel, that's the big jumbo beams, which are produced in a rolling, under a rolling technique, which had been developed by a US engineer, Gray. And the Gray mill in Differdange today is the mill producing the heaviest and the strongest beams and the largest range of beams and metallic sections you can find in the world, and which are used in all also of the BRIC countries for the high-rise buildings, for example, the World Trade Center in Shanghai, or for example other buildings, the Gazprom building in Moscow, and I would say all the tallest buildings in the world, in the BRICS camp, but also in the US, are made out of steel coming from Luxembourg. And so the respect of intellectual property is something very important. Third thing was, for a country like Luxembourg, but I think it's also globally true, is a level playing field for everyone, so that you can develop. And last but not least, and I think where many of the actors in the BRIC countries are today very strong, that is entrepreneurship and moving forward in order to develop. I would like now come to my second point, that is a little bit ArcelorMittal and BRICS, what makes it together. And I would say that there are probably few countries, few companies in the world, and definitely none in the steel industry, who has so strong ties and interests in the BRICS countries than ArcelorMittal. For proof, First of all, Brazil, I was saying it already today, ArcelorMittal was the first to produce steel in Brazil and is today the biggest steel producer in Brazil. If I look at Russia, I would say ArcelorMittal today is not directly strongly in manufacturing present in Russia, but is very active and very big in two of the former Soviet republics. That means Kazakhstan. We are the biggest steel producer in Kazakhstan and the biggest steel producer in Ukraine. And at the same moment, we are also a big producer of iron ore and also coal producer in these countries. By the way, for the anecdote, before ArcelorMittal became ArcelorMittal, it was Arcelor here with the headquarters in Luxembourg, and then there was this unsolicited offer from Mr. Mittal who has an Indian passport, as everyone knows, and at that moment there was then a Russian player who wanted also to merge with Arcelor, and that was Severstal. So it was in fact two big entrepreneurs from BRIC countries who made the fight, and at the end of the stage it was Mittal, Mr. Mittal Steel, who was making the merger and which was making what we are indeed together. India, the third country, so I was speaking about the passport of Mr. Mittal, it's quite obvious, but it was up to now all the time very tough to become an investor in the Indian steel industry. We had as a company projects for 10 years, 3 or 4 projects to build a new greenfield plant in India, but I must say due to the bureaucratic processes, due to the very difficulties you find to acquire significant land and water resources or so, it was extremely difficult to achieve that, and in fact that's also one of the reasons why even over the last 15 years or so, and whereas the Indian steel production was growing quite heavy, there was almost no new greenfield plants which was emerging. Now, fortunately, 1.5 years ago, there was one of the major Indian steel producers in flat steel, SR Steel, whose owners entered into a kind of Chapter 11 process, and it gave ArcelorMittal the possibility then to become interested. So I cannot yet say that we will be together with Nippon Steel, the major shareholder in SR Steel, because the way we have not yet closed the transaction, and we are still in the final, before the final Supreme Court, in order to have the discussion. But it should be imminent, because today the legal situation is such that there is either the choice that we can, that our offer will be finalized, or that the company would have to be liquidated, which obviously nobody wants. So that, and probably if this event would have taken place a quarter later, I would have said ArcelorMittal is now one of the 4 big players in India, next to SAIL, to Tata Steel, and to GSW. ArcelorMittal is also active industrially in China, once again with our specialties. ArcelorMittal is in fact the world leader to produce steel for automotive solutions, for the body in white, for the structure, for the safety, and so on. And in China, indeed, we have such a joint venture with Hunan Valin, which is one of the major producers and coming from the province of Hunan. And there we have a 50-50 joint venture where we have made a lot of transfer of technology in order to make it possible for the growing Chinese automotive industry to benefit from these very sophisticated steel grades in order to develop. Last but not least, and you mentioned it, BRICS meets today in Brazil, but BRIC is no longer BRIC is also BRICS. And there is a 5th member where we do not have yet a chamber here in Luxembourg, that's South Africa. And I wanted to mention it because ArcelorMittal is also the largest steel producer in South Africa. So in order to make it sure and to show precisely how we have developed this presence and how we tried really to build up partnerships and to develop. And from that point of view, and when I was thinking a little bit also from a manufacturing point of view, I was thinking what could even be improved from what has based from what has been achieved now. And I think that there are several questions also from a manufacturing point of view which have to be taken into consideration. One is definitely climate change. I think also Karl Ackermann already mentioned it. We have everyone today is aware that the future of climate is the future of mankind, and that we mean that we need to do it. But Europe is basically up to now the only big continent who has really contributed through the European emission trading system. But the consequence for manufacturing industry is quite perverse, because in the fact that when we manufacture steel in Europe, we have to pay for CO2, and when China or India imports steel from their country to Europe, they get it for CO2 free. So even in our own market, we do not have a level playing field. This is obviously a big problem. It's an international problem. One of the reasons of the consequence of that has been that more and more countries have erected trade barriers in order to protect, because there is no level playing field, which is obviously a big problem. And that you see it also in certain countries, for example, and as we are here to discuss, I would say it's not a criticism, but it is also an objective. If you look at a country like China, I was saying we have a joint venture 50-50 with Hunan Vanyin, because we were not authorized to have a 100% subsidiary, because at that moment, as a foreign investor for strategic sectors like the steel industry or the car industry, you were not allowed either to make an acquisition or to establish a full thing. And the rules were there. You have to transfer technology, you have to develop it, and then sometimes, maybe I don't think that it happened in our own case, but you hear from other cases that at the end, when the technology is in the country, there is a risk of copy, and that makes then a lot of problem. And it is a question of also then of good faith. And so from that point of view, fair trade, international trade, but also intellectual property and the respect of the rule of the law is something which is extremely important, because otherwise you cannot qualify that these partners have a market economy status. I think the policy in Brazil today is really to go into that direction, but my recommendation would be for all the BRIC countries, I think they have today such an opportunity, is to open themselves to fully behave like market economies, and then they can also discuss then on an equal basis also with the G7 countries where Luxembourg is not members, but which is essential also to build this multilateral basis for good cooperation and for trade. Maybe one last problem which is important also in some of the countries, or sometimes you meet also what is important today, is that you have to have a full absence of corruption, because when you have corruption also, it's something which is not a good partnership. You need to pay attention. And so another recommendation should be that in all of the countries, and I do not now say this or there, but we know that corruption is a problem which might happen in all of the countries. It happens also from time to time in some of the BRIC countries, and that's something which is definitely hindering manufacturing cooperation and equal cooperation. So my conclusion is that BRICS is a fantastic opportunity, I think, for the 5 countries by themselves, but more generally also to show the way and to build really a good counterpart also with G7, in order to form a global alliance how to develop the world economy for the good. And that is what I would really like to have it. In order to do that, you need fair trade, you need free foreign investment, you need no subsidized foreign financing, and you need to be visionary. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Wirth, thank you for your insights into brick manufacturing in Luxembourg and ArcelorMittal. Before we move now to the panel, we have a short advertisement. It's about a book. So, Mark Jacobs from Hofstede Insights would like to speak about a book. It's 5 minutes presentation. It's a book about cultural differences, and because Luxembourg is very multicultural society, then he can share, well, what is the best way to negotiate when you have many cultures.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you. Well, as you can see, I'm the surprise guest tonight. I'm not on the program, so. But thank you for the opportunity. There's a few people in the room who know me. I have a manufacturing background. I came to Luxembourg 21 years ago as co-founder of an injection molding company. Mr. Ackerman, we know each other from those days even. And rather than trying to explain everything about the book, I want to give you a little bit the story and the background. So when building this business in Luxembourg, we obviously doing business internationally. And one of the things we did consciously was trying to adapt our way of negotiating, our way of working with our customers to their culture. So we are, let's say, pick an example, with the Dutch we'd be quite direct, right? Because they're pretty direct. With the Germans we'd be very structured. Whatever, that's what you... Okay. With the Germans very structured, with the French much more diplomatic. And to the point where our customers actually said that we were different because it was so easy to work with us. And when your customer tells you that, you know that's going to have an impact on your bottom line. So that's great, but we did it based on experience. Like probably all of you do, I mean, you're all experts at doing international business. And then in 2012, I stumbled across an academic framework that translates or describes these cultural differences in numbers. Anybody heard about Hofstede? Geert Hofstede? That ring a bell? One? There's a few people up there. To me, I'd never heard of it. So Geert Hofstede is a Dutch engineer who became a social psychologist and whose life's work has become to develop a data-based approach to put numbers on these cultural differences that we experience. When I discovered that, I was like, wow, and I'm an engineer, so when you can put numbers on something like that, that's really meaningful for me. So I dug into it and really discovered a system that can bring a lot of value to international business. So I joined the organization because I wanted to learn more. And as part of that, as part of the trajectory, I became co-author of the book, Negotiate Like a Local, where we basically translate the academic framework in what do you do with this? How is this helpful? How can this bring value to your business? So that's what this book is. It's been published in English, it's available on Amazon, and it's really, it attempts to be a very practical tool. Now, the Hofstede system, for those who don't know it, we have data on 110 countries. So numbers-based system on 110 countries. So once you understand the system, it'll help you improve doing business with these 110 countries without having to know specifically, having specific knowledge about these countries. What this book is about is that based on the data, based on those numbers, you can actually cluster groups of countries that from a macro perspective have similar mindsets. Give you an example. If you come from China and you look at Germany or Austria, it's going to be very, very similar. The Nordics, you can cluster that together in terms of behavior. So based on the data, those 110 countries we can actually cluster in 7 groups. Actually, it's not true, 6 plus 1, because Japan stands out. Japan never fits, doesn't fit in any of the actual groups. So that's what this book is about. Olga only gave me 5 minutes, so I really need to keep it short. But I'm convinced it brings value. Some of you have read it. Jacques is one of them. Yeah. And I'm also very proud to say that this is a Chinese version. It has just been published by Fudan University Press. So that's a strong link to the event as well here today. And how that came about was a connection through the Confucius Institute here in Luxembourg with a professor of economics at Fudan, who's also the director of the Center for European Studies at Fudan, who picked the subject up and said, yes, that's it. This is very valuable also for our Chinese market, and we're happy to publish that. So this is actually one of the first books I got. I just got the first shipment, and we will launch it formally this Friday at the Chambre de Commerce, which is why there's also that little thing up there, the Culture Factor Conference at the Chambre de Commerce. So, I hope this is of interest to you. I hope this can bring you value for your organizations, because in the end, that's what we're all looking for. Thank you.
It's time for the panel. Jean-Paul Ollingler, the director of Union des Entreprises Luxembourgeoises. So you invite your panel on stage? From here? And then okay, so then let's take I'll change you.
Excellencies, dear Chairwoman, Chairman and members of the bilateral chambers, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to moderate the panel on the BRIC and Luxembourg manufacturing now in a few moments. My name is Jean-Paul Ollinger. I'm the director of UEL and INDR, as was said. As a reminder, a small reminder, UEL is the Union des Entreprises Luxembourgeoises. It's the umbrella organization of the Luxembourg business community, federating the interest of two professional chambers. You have the Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber of Crafts, and you have 6 business federations, the ABBL, ACA, FEDIL, Fédération des Artisans, CLC, and HORESCA. INDR is the National Institute for CSR, or to take a more modern word, ESG, promoting the concept of sustainable business. In a few moments, the panelists will share with you their experience on manufacturing in Luxembourg and the BRIC countries, opportunities, challenges, and will show you that manufacturing has strong roots and potential for the future in Luxembourg. When I was looking at the numbers yesterday that were presented by the Brazilian, or the president of the Brazilian chamber, and also by Carlo Ackermann, I was a little bit impressed by the numbers, and I'm not going to repeat the numbers, but I thought now, when looking at the numbers of the percentage of lands and economic growth, and looking at BRIC, making out of BRIC BRICL, or LBRIC, would make a big difference for Luxembourg, because then we would be part of that big community. With this in mind, I would like to welcome the panelists in BRIC order, as was done before as well. So for Brazil, Mr. Joel Cardenas. Please come up. So Spanish, Business Unit Director of Intertrust, holder of a degree in law with a master in international tax and accounting. Joel is an accounting and financial services professional with over 11 years experience at Intertrust, previously with Big Four audit firms. Joel heads today a team of approximately 25 legal and financial professionals dedicated to the Southern European and Latin markets. So for Russia, I would like to welcome Remo Ackermann, Luxembourgish, Sales and Purchasing Director and Deputy Manager at Akuma Lux Group. He's also a member of the board of Akuma Lux Group, holder of a degree in economics from the south of France and a master's degree in international business from Boston. Remo has acquired a lot of experience in the finance industry in New York, London, and Berlin before joining Akuma Lux. Given his knowledge of the Russian language, the entrance fitted very well when there was a recent development of the company towards the east. Today, Raymond is responsible for the Russian plant. He's the head of sales and of purchasing. Besides that, Raymond is also active in the Federation for Young Leaders in Luxembourg, and he's a founding member of the recently created Luxembourg chapter of the internationally known Family Business Network. For India, sorry, yeah. Now you see them. For India, I would like to welcome Heike Karl Zatterstrom, Chief Communications Officer of Boson Energy, holder of a Master of Science from the Stockholm School of Economics. He has also briefly studied in the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota and at the St. Petersburg State University in Russia. Heike has professionally and personally been attached with India for more than 12 years by now, first in his capacity as a representative of Evalu Reserve in the Benelux and since a few years with Boson Energy. Finally, we come to China with Mr. Stefan Grengs, Director Manufacturing and Supply Chain Management of EAA or IEE Group. Stefan holds a university degree in mechanical engineering, finally the first engineer at the panel, and an MBA with specialization in general management. He has almost 17 years in automotive sector experience and held multiple responsibilities. Today he's the Director of Manufacturing and Supply Chain at IEE. He's in charge of 5 plants in the US, in Mexico, in Slovakia, in Luxembourg and in China, the Central Process and Prototyping Organization, and as well the Global Logistics and Supply Chain Organization. Stefan, in addition to all of these responsibilities, he had also a local assignment to China for almost 2 years. Welcome to the panel. So we have organized the panel in 4 blocks of questions to speak about manufacturing in Luxembourg, manufacturing in the BRIC, about opportunities and challenges in the future, and also about the interaction between the companies with the bilateral chambers, with diplomatic representations and the government, and to see what would be, what leverage could we get out of there. So, to start with the first question block, I would start with Luxembourg as a manufacturing place. As we had heard before already, Luxembourg has a well-established manufacturing industry, not only for finance industry, high technologies, in line with the ambitious environmental roadmap that we have everywhere in Europe. Luxembourg is also at crossroads of technologies. So I would like to start the question with a question to Raymond Ackermann. Raymond, can you give us your view on Luxembourg as a manufacturing place from the perspective of Acumenux?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Happy to be here. Thank you, Jean-Paul, for the introduction and Olga for the organization. So maybe to start with, just for those who don't know us, the Acumenux Group was founded in 1976. We are operating today in 4 countries, which is Luxembourg, Czech Republic, Bulgaria and Russia. We have about 400 employees. What we do is we produce containers and boxes for all kind of battery products that we have in the world. We supply to roughly 30 countries worldwide, so obviously all of the 4 BRIC countries. We produce about 30 million sets yearly. That's the production capacity. And so that's just a few words about us. Now, to come to your question, how we see Luxembourg as a manufacturing place, I have to say that, as it was already said a little bit in the previous speeches, Luxembourg has been built actually because of manufacturing and industry, and the finances came only later. So I think that Luxembourg has a very big industrial and manufacturing history, and this is still something which is true today. For example, our mother company, previously we were doing explosives for the mining industry, so already at that point we were active in the industry. And today we can see that there are still a lot of advantages to have a company here, be it the proximity to neighboring countries, be it to have the euro. I think that needs to be said, that it's very important to have the euro as a currency, because sometimes you think it's obvious, but it's not that obvious. We have a lot of languages, we have very high-skilled labor, and something also which is very positive is the push in Luxembourg for producing environmentally friendly. For example, we have been investing this year in 2 silos of a very high capacity, which allows us to produce a huge amount of our production with 100% recycled plastic. There's some more difficult points, but maybe we can come back to those at a later point today. are, of course, that there's not always such a positive image about Luxembourg, about the industry in Luxembourg. There's also a lack of qualified engineers, and of course the price pressure from countries with cheaper labor.
Thank you, Timo. IEE is another success story in Luxembourg. Stefan, how come? Can you tell us more?
Yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. Yeah, IEE actually is a pretty young company and a classical Luxembourgish startup company. About 30 years ago, so it was founded in 1989, 5 Luxembourgish engineers had just a great idea. So they thought, just go to sensing technologies, automotive market. But before we enter to the automotive market, they started with HMI systems, so human-machine interfaces. And out of this handful of people, meanwhile, we are 4,000 around the world. It went actually pretty fast. So we are in a niche market in the automotive. I'm pretty sure everybody of you knows our system. So if you're not buckling up in your car and start swinging, it's annoying you, that's us. That's about 30 years. We are meanwhile, as I said, 4,000 people around the world. We are present in 11 countries around the world. Just to give you some numbers, turnover around 500 million, and we're producing more than 30 million sensors a year. So that's just to give you a number on what we're doing today. And I'm really honored to represent China here today, because China is meanwhile one of our main markets and also a driver for our company and our whole group.
One question, how many people do you have working in R&D out of the 4,000?
Actually, good point. So the R&D portion at IE is pretty important. So we have more than 10 to 15% of our employees doing nothing else than R&D to shape our future and also to shape the automotive sector and the safety in the cars for the future.
Thank you. Joël, as a global leader in corporate administration services for companies and also high net wealth individuals, you seem to me to be a bridge between manufacturing and finance in the broader sense. Yeah. How do you see this?
Yeah. So first, good evening to everybody. A pleasure to be here as well with the rest of the panelists. So just also to give a bit of background about Intertrust and to understand what I'm going to say later on. So we are one of the global corporate and trust service providers listed in the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, around 3,500 employees. And we are in 40, we have 40 offices, and the Luxembourg one is the largest one of the group. So that being said, about the bridge, and I'm going to take and benefit from some of the figures that previously were said. So we have the BRICS, a huge, geographical area. I think it was mentioned around 41% of the geographic area in the world, 25 to 30% of the GDP worldwide. And we have Luxembourg, the second financial center in the European Union, and in the next month, the first one, and one of the largest in the world. And so in the word bridge, we need a bridge to connect these two. And the bridge, it's the wide range of Luxembourg investment vehicles, from non-regulated to regulated. And at Intertrust, we manage all of them. So we help our clients through these investment vehicles in Luxembourg to invest in the BRIC countries.
Thank you. Let's come to Boson Energy. Heike, Boson Energy is a younger company compared to the other panelists, yes, to the other companies here. Also active in a very promising field. We spoke already a little bit about energetic transition today and environmental transition. Can you tell us more about your project?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm a bit of the odd one out here. We don't even do manufacturing, but we develop hardware. So that will be manufactured. Boson develops the next generation of waste-to-energy technology, which is better, cleaner, cheaper than existing solutions. If you want to create an efficient circular economy or a zero waste future, you actually cannot do that without safe and efficient destruction and energy harvesting. And that's what we do. We reduce waste volume with 99% into a usable material, so there's no toxic residues. And we do that close to the source of the waste, so there's no waste leaking into oceans and rivers and into nature. And that's what we do. And the BRIC markets are big markets, big potential markets for us. One of the things that is connected to growth economically is, sadly, the growth of waste. That has not been decoupled yet, and it won't.
So you're the solution to the plastic in the ocean?
Yes, very much so.
I propose to go to the second question block. So the present and the current strategies that you all have in the BRIC countries. The objective is to see also a little bit what your professional ties are and to go a little bit more into detail, the partnerships that you have there and the complementarity that you see between countries, between the BRIC countries, between Luxembourg and the BRIC countries. And I would propose to continue, Heike, with you. Being a small company, how do you manage to enter a market like India? What is your strategy?
Yeah, so as I said, we develop these technologies and solutions, which gives us the opportunity to cherry pick the best manufacturers there is. And for India, we're partnering with Siemens, which has been, I mean, Luxembourg has 75 years of diplomatic relations with India. Siemens has been in India since 1922, and in the 1800s they also pulled the first telegraph line in the ocean from London to Kolkata. So they've been there for a while, manufacturing since 1956. And they now manufacture to the same quality standards, advanced technology in India as they do in Germany. In Luxembourg, we work together with SAB and also with TMT Polvurt that also manufacture in India. So we have the advantage of not having to deal with a lot of the problems around manufacturing, but rather set our standards and then be delivered. And we understand that to be present in these markets properly, you also need to manufacture locally. But are we on Luxembourg as well here? No. Okay.
Does it help you, or when you are in India, does it help you when you say that you are from Luxembourg and knowing that ArcelorMittal has roots there, that Ceratizid is there as well, Polvurt you just mentioned?
Yeah, there's Polvurt definitely has a brand name, and there are others as well. Yeah, Ceratizid. The ambassador is very active. We're very happy with Ambassador Kugner. He's really pushing India and going to events and making Luxembourg known.
Thank you. Joël, as a global firm, I guess you have a global strategy with regard to the BRIC countries. What is the strategy of the Luxembourg firm, and how does it integrate into your global strategy?
Yeah, indeed, as I mentioned before, having 40 offices around the world, we cannot disregard the BRIC countries. So we have presence in Brazil and a strong presence in India and China. And from the Luxembourg office, we cooperate closely with those countries. We do have clients that either they use the Luxembourg investment vehicles to invest somewhere else in the world, or the other way around. I mean, for instance, and for the Brazilian part, which I am here, we do see an increase in the last years of, banks, which are Brazilian banks, which are present in Luxembourg, which are increasing their presence and their activities. Brazilian corporations that they want to have a presence in Europe, and they choose Luxembourg as the European hub. Also, large family office from Brazil as well, and we help them to set up their presence in Luxembourg, because for some of them it's the first time they are setting up an office outside Brazil. And indeed, Luxembourg has, in relation with Brazil, it's become more and more attractive for them as having their hub for overseeing their financial operations, mainly in Europe, but also around the world.
The regulatory environment and the tax environment in Luxembourg helps in that regard?
Indeed, it helps. Indeed, it helps, but it's becoming indeed more and more complex. I would say not only Luxembourg, but worldwide. Some of these corporations, family office, they had presence in other places. Let's say more in the Caribbean, less regulated. So indeed, they come to Luxembourg, and it's a kind of a shock. Also, it's a different time zone. It's far. But also the benefit from coming to Luxembourg, and it was mentioned before, is there is a very high qualified workforce. And this is a representation, I mean, of what is Luxembourg. We come from different countries. I have come here with some colleagues who are from Brazil, and they came to work recently, and we have seen an increase of Brazilians coming to Luxembourg. So for Brazilian corporations and clients, it's very easier to adapt and to come to Luxembourg knowing they have the qualified people and coming from their countries here.
You also mentioned that they had there's more activity in Luxembourg coming from Brazil than before. In addition to the offshore financial places, there was also a lot of presence in Europe, but it was rather in the Netherlands.
That's correct, and. By the way, we do see that at Intertrust because the second largest office and our headquarters is there. But indeed, Luxembourg has not been very well known in Brazil during the last years, although, as it was mentioned, for 100 years already there were companies there. But just to give an example, the first embassy of Luxembourg in Latin America was opened last year in Brazil, so already it's a first and a big step. And indeed, so for large corporations in the last years, it was more common or well known to use the Netherlands as the financial center. But in the last years, indeed, we see a trend and an increase in Luxembourg. Not only, but one of the reasons is that I think it's since last year, but the Netherlands, it's included in a grey list for tax purpose in Brazil, which Luxembourg is not.
Coming to IEE, Stefan, for your decision to go to China, or had other reasons in the beginning than now, how was this decision in the beginning taken, and how has it evolved today, your present?
Yeah, well, as I said, IEE is a pretty young company, and the business was growing pretty fast, and especially in the manufacturing area. So all of us came from engineering and development. So we had a great idea, a good product, but end of the day, this ends up for sure in business, and the volume needs to be produced. So up to that date, we had only presence here in Luxembourg. So one plant, which is still today our lead plant for technologies. But pretty fast, we recognized that we either on cost side as well on space constraints we had that we have find solutions to deliver to our customers. Before we actually went to China, we didn't open the plant in Slovakia. We hired a contract manufacturer in China in Slovakia, which we finally founded then by ourselves. Meanwhile, there are more and more customers came and were really interested in our products. And during that time period, especially the US customers were more or less forcing us to go to low-cost countries. So it was not really the strategy, okay, we're choosing China because China is nice, it's our market, it's our place during that time. Because if you think back, China is growing and developing really fast. So just 10 years or 15 years ago, there were a lot of cars in China, but they did not care so much yet for safety products inside the cars. So during that time, we chose China actually as a low-cost manufacturing country, and we were producing, at the beginning, 100% for export. So we produced in China and shipped everything to the US. So it sounds strange, especially if we are considering today the environmental and carbon footprint. So most probably we would not do it again, but during that time it was the decision for IE. But it didn't took long. Then the car market and the car environment in China changed as well. And as I said, they are changing fast. And meanwhile, they are on the same standards than we are here. So we decided that the Chinese market is as well a pretty important market for us, which was not the case initially. Then just a couple of years ago, let's say 1 or 2 years after we opened the manufacturing plant, we decided, so now we're going to attack the Chinese market. So the Chinese market, I think this is more or less self-speaking. It's more or less impossible to drive the Chinese market with a representative in Luxembourg only. So you need a local team, you need the language barrier and the cultural barrier. So we opened in Beijing a development office, which is still growing, where we're developing, meanwhile, all sensors and sensor technologies for the Chinese, and I would even say for the Asian market. So it was indeed not the purpose to go to China for China, but this changed meanwhile totally. China is for sure a big market, and we are growing inside the country and as well on the Asian region. And China is meanwhile our home base for all Asian operations.
Thank you. Raymond, what is your presence in the BRIC countries?
So we have been present in the BRIC countries since many years because we are a company that does 100% export as well. So we have been selling to India, to China, to Brazil, to Russia for nearly since the beginning, I would say. And the main reason why we would think about opening a manufacturing unit in one of those countries would be because our product is a product that is very difficult to transport in the sense that it's very expensive to transport an empty box full of air. So that's why we decided at some point, for example, to open plants around Europe, but then the first one that we opened in the BRIC countries was Russia. And that has been, how did we do that? That was many years of very good relationships with several customers that we have in Russia. And at some points, the relationship were that good that we decided that the risk would allow us to go into Russia because it's not so, because you don't have that many customers in our business. So you need to be sure that once you take such a decision that you will have enough opportunities and markets in the country. But that turned out to work quite well. And today, even our Russian subsidiary is the one which has the highest growth of all our companies. And we were also very close already at several points with India. So far, it has never been done. However, we have established with various customers very strong relationships. For example, they are, for those from India, they certainly know the company Exide and Amara Raja. They are very active also in the OEM market for Volkswagen, and we do supply from Luxembourg products that we sell into those markets for example, Volkswagen. The other reason, of course, why it's more and more important, not only because of the transport cost, but also another perspective is, of course, the growth of these countries is absolutely enormous. I mean, even if in Brazil you had a small down phase over the last years, it's picking up again quite quickly, I think, and the market is enormous. And the people there and the companies there are absolutely not to underestimate. They are very well capable of doing the same progress as we do. Even in some cases, they are already, especially in China, we have to be very careful. I mean, they are very strong in R&D, and their products there are a lot of products that we buy today which come from China and not the other way around as it used to be. So I think it's very important to be present in those markets. The next strategy that we have is I think the next strategy that we have is to focus further on the relationships, because with the existing customer base. In Brazil, I've been in the 4 countries, in the 4 BRIC countries actually this year to to see the opportunities that do exist. And I think one where the opportunities are getting bigger and bigger is Brazil. But Brazil has also already a lot of very established production of what we do. But the advantage is that we have products where you can develop them further together. So they have, for example, already some part of our product, and we supply the other part of the product. And the import duties that are in place allow, if you do that locally, you will become really the leader of that market. You will have no competition anymore from any other South American countries, because they won't be able to be competitive.
Thank you. I propose to go to the third block of questions, and it's going to continue, Raymond, on what you were saying, a little bit about the opportunities. So the third block is opportunities and challenges that you will see in Luxembourg and BRIC today and tomorrow. And briefly, maybe also your next steps that you would see for your own presence in one of the countries. Expansions and maybe also entering new markets. So some of you already touched a little bit on that. So I would propose to start with IEE. If you could provide us with your view on opportunities and challenges in Luxembourg and BRIC, please. Stefan.
So let's start first. What do we have common meanwhile? So common is, most probably all of you, it was already mentioned, the labor force in Luxembourg, and to find really educated engineers and people is getting more and more difficult. So if you have open positions, I hope it's not just us, but it's really difficult to fill them. And actually this is similar meanwhile in China. So it's unbelievable, but the market in China, also the opportunities for the Chinese engineers is huge. So to find good people and to keep the people. So that's one of the challenges where we join the problems between Luxembourg and China. As mentioned before, the initial strategy to go to China was low cost. But unfortunately, low-cost China is more or less gone. So China is the costs in China are raising really drastically year by year. So the inflation is really high on that. It's just a question of time until we cannot talk about any more low-cost labor. So that's most probably also one of the reasons why the Chinese strategy in general, so with the strategy Made in China 2025, and as well intelligent manufacturing in China, is coming more and more important. So in the past, Luxembourg was under a huge pressure of, let's say, to stay competitive with the other plants around the world, just because of the labor cost. And the focus in Luxembourg was and is automatization, trying to be as efficient as possible. And to be honest, in China, the focus was different. This changed a lot, and this is also a challenge, and also on the other hand, an opportunity. So we are more and more going in the direction to start development actions, as well development actions in process engineering in China, to develop our plan in China to Industrial 4.0. To digitalization and really to intelligent manufacturing, to not being that dependent anymore on the raise of the salaries. And the next good point as well, mentioned just before, the transportation cost is getting more and more an issue in our business, and being present in the local region is getting more and more mandatory. Transportation cost on one hand, and the import duties on the other hand. We are talking about challenges. China and the US is in a trade war, so this is not really a secret. You can all follow Twitter if you want. This is indeed creating still for us an issue, because we are still not only on the Chinese markets. We have still a portion of export, and all the products we are delivering from China to US. So just to give you an idea what that means, meanwhile, if we are raising from 2.5% duties to 32% duties. So this is a 30% difference and if you are not lucky and your Incoterms were negotiated well, so you are stuck, at least at the beginning. So this is, let's say, the challenges, but the opportunities for Luxembourg especially. So we are really in central of the world. So this is something that we as a Luxembourgish company really have in mind. So we are in the middle of Europe, we are in the middle of the world, so we have a perfect destination for the time shift in all regions, whether we're talking about Brazil, US, China, India. So it's all during our day. And being an American company and work with China, you have to do night shift. So otherwise you have no choice to find a common way of discussion. In China, indeed, the market is getting more and more important. The quality standards are raising. So China is not the low-cost country anymore in the future. China is a high quality and also a high automized company in the next years, which will also lead to a good market position for the Asian region.
You're mentioning that you are doing a lot of R&D, and Industry 4.0 is a very important topic in manufacturing. Where's your center for Industry 4.0? And also, are you only in automotive or also? You were mentioning during our discussion about e-health and other energy sectors where you are present.
Yeah. So our global headquarter is here in Luxembourg. Our global R&D headquarter is here in Luxembourg. So nevertheless, we are growing more and more R&D areas in the regions. So we are developing in the US, we are developing in Korea, we are developing in China, and China is taking more and more the lead here for that areas. Nevertheless, in China, we are still really automotive focused. And our plant and our R&D center here in Luxembourg is covering for sure much more. So we are in e-health, we are in building management, battery management systems. So automotive is one big portion of our business, but we are in much more areas present. And I would even say we are in all intelligent sensor technologies. The best way is to ask ID.
Thank you. We will remember that. Raymond, could you maybe also share with us a little bit the opportunities and challenges that you see in Russia and in Luxembourg?
Yes, sure, with pleasure. So I think one of the biggest opportunity that Russia saw over the last years was actually the biggest disadvantage for the entire Europe. That was the sanctions that were put in place. Because at the end, what happened, if you think about it, is that the Russians, they are by mentality very strong people that really very rarely give up. And what happened at the end is that the industry itself in Russia developed at an extreme quick pace because they were not allowed anymore, or it became too expensive because of the exchange rate difference to buy something from Europe. So I think they're the only one that lost in that battle were actually Western Europe. And the ones that clearly won were the Russians. I mean, I can take as a very clear example our own company. We were supplying previously a lot of the Russian customers from Czech Republic from our subsidiary there, but nowadays in Russia we got the entire market, even from our competitors that were supplying from Europe. They're just no one at all buys anymore in Russia. From our Western European competitors. It's just not possible. So I think that were enormous opportunities, and there still are enormous opportunities. The other advantage of Russia is that you are quite kind of a hub for all the stands, like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and all of that. So they usually understand the language. They have slightly the same culture. So it's also a big advantage to be in Russia for those countries, and that market is enormous. And also the education level in Russia is high. I mean, they have top engineers, really. They are also in the space industry, they are very strong. And that culture has been there for many, many years. And if you look for qualified engineers, especially in our region, in Tolyatti, which is the hub of the automotive industry in Russia, you find a lot of good engineers. So I think the opportunities are big. I think one of the biggest risks I see is obviously, but that's there I have, of course, no answer, is what happens after Putin will not be there anymore. Because he manages, obviously, no matter what we think about him, he manages to keep the country in the way it is today, but if he is replaced, I don't know, then a lot can change. I think that's a challenge. To move on to Luxembourg, I think the most was already said, but I can maybe add that Luxembourg has tremendous opportunities for Industry 4.0 and automatization, because you need engineers there that are really coming from schools like ETH or TU München and so on. So, and you do find those sometimes, and that's an enormous advantage to keep the industry here when you can rely on such people to develop these automated processes, because they require a lot of knowledge, high skills, and they need to be constantly present, because if something happens to such a machine and automatization, it needs to be repaired immediately. So also this creates new jobs. It's also not to think that automatization removes jobs. It creates jobs just on a higher skilled level. And I think Luxembourg is doing a very well job there, a very good job there. Also, the Ministry of Economy and Lux Innovation is helping a lot in that direction. I think the problem is, though, with Luxembourg, and well, one obviously for us is a very old topic, but it's still a very big problem, is the indexation of salaries. I mean, we do only export. So if I increase the salaries of the employees by any amount because of an indexation, which is not something I decide, it's something the government decides, or I cannot go to my customer in Brazil or in China and tell them, I'm sorry, I need to increase my cost of my product because the government in Luxembourg decided to increase, but it's just not possible. And I think that's really something that we need to be very careful about, because we do manage to produce cheaper and more efficiently, but you at some point you reach a limit. You cannot produce cheaper anymore, and you cannot the maximum of efficiency, and then something like this hits you immediately on the margin. I think that's one of the points that we need to be very, very careful how to deal with that in the future. While the other is more I would say a recommendation I would give, although I didn't study myself engineering, I would still encourage to pass the message in schools, at home, and by friends that the young generations should study engineering. Because with philosophy and sociology, which is very popular, you will not get very far, I think, in the next years, and you will get very far with things like mechanical engineering, for example. I think this is something important for our country.
For the indexation, we would need just to export that concept to the BRIC countries. That would help us.
Yeah.
Let's continue with boson energy. Heike. What do you see in Luxembourg and in India?
Well, in India, just like the other BRICS markets, I mean, it's an enormous market with a lot of waste. There are also, I mean, in India, there is a qualified workforce. The diplomatic ties, the active ambassador, all of these things are things that help us. And it's interesting that we also see a lot of thinking in India, where, for instance, one of the things that we plan to do is to put our plants on the ground. And this was kind of pushed by the city planner of Mumbai, who was basically out of space. We also talked to people in India that send their kids to college in New York because they can't afford to have their kids in school in Mumbai. So things are really changing. On the negative side, yeah, patience. India. There was a Make in India initiative launched by Modi 5 years ago with a lot of fanfare. That has actually rendered limited results. I mean, China is 18% of global production. India is still at 2%. There are some regulatory changes that need to happen. I mean, once you get past 100 people on a plant, you run into regulations regarding hiring and firing and things like that, which makes it difficult for India to scale. So there's more kind of smaller facilities, and then you don't get the same economies of scale. For Luxembourg, there's obviously a vibrant Indian diaspora and community here that we enjoy a lot. We've lent our Senior Vice President Asia, Aditya Sharma, to the board of the IBCL, and we feel the support of IBCL as well. Luxembourg is still pretty small in an India context. It can be difficult for officials to get attention, but energy there does a lot of good. We can see on Ambassador Kugner. In terms of our plans now, we have been approved by the National Mission for Clean Ganges as the only solid waste technology in the world, basically, to set up the first demonstration plant. And that project we're working on now, identifying a site to show that dealing with waste right where it happens is the way to prevent waste from ending up in the Ganges and ultimately in the ocean.
Thank you. Joël, for Brazil and Luxembourg, from your perspective.
Yeah, so for Brazil, it's the largest economy in Latin America, the largest country, and the country with more population, so it's a geographical area that cannot be disregarded. And we, as I said, we have an office there and a lot of clients from that region. So I think that's, of course, a huge opportunity to look at. As a challenge, well, and it was mentioned by Laertes, indeed, the current government is trying to open the economy. And I mean, for the Luxembourg side, I think we do see, that's one of the reasons we do see an increase in corporations and family offices going outside Brazil to invest abroad. But indeed, there's a few challenges in Brazil, and I think one is that to see if this government will have sufficient time or to see results, positive results in the economy. They are currently a major tax reform, pension reform, but also there are still big social inequalities in Brazil. So I think that's a challenge, and if we all look, or we see the news in Latin America, we do see turmoil in Chile, in Bolivia, so things can change drastically from one government to another. So hopefully there will be positive results, and this trend will continue in Brazil. And for the Luxembourg part, as I mentioned before, so as a result of this more, let's say, liberalization of the economy, we do see movements from Brazilian corporations and family offices and banks coming to Luxembourg. We do see investors from other countries looking to invest in Brazil via Luxembourg. So this is indeed very positive on and the opportunity for Luxembourg. On the challenges on a different scale that was mentioned, but indeed the costs, the cost of high qualified people, which of course increases the maintenance cost of the Luxembourg vehicles, to find those qualified people, and the let's say overall increase of the complexity of tax compliance and regulations. It's a challenge as well.
Thank you. Let's come to the last question, the fourth block. Actually, this machine works very well. We are very sophisticated, but the machine just says back or next, so quite easy for me. The fourth question is about enablers for further cooperation between companies, government and business representatives. Maybe just briefly on that. So to see a little bit the role of the bodies, such as the bilateral chambers, the respective governments or their diplomatic representations in the countries. We just briefly mentioned some experiences, and I would propose, Stefan, that you start for IEE. Would you have any message, any...
Actually, this can be answered even in one sentence. just continue the success story. So we have a really good relationship. The work in between the countries is pretty good. But nevertheless, you never reach the perfect target. So just keep going. And the real big support is really as well also on transportation. So nicely, I even met one person from the CFL today here, and like the train going from China to Luxembourg. It's a really a big benefit for the Luxembourg-based companies who are dealing with China. So that's projects the government and the cooperation between the countries should work on. Nevertheless, but this is unfortunately not only in the hand of Luxembourg, that's also in the direction of Europe. We have more to push on a closer relationship to the BRIC countries in general, so it's not just China. So to really increase for sure, to increase the hurdles between the countries. So is it duty-wise, is it tax-wise, is it just the paperwork you need to do and all that stuff? So for sure it's not like within Europe. Many here in the group most probably know how it was before the European Union. So as you had to declare stuff between Germany and Luxembourg and whatever. So and we all know the advantages of such collaboration and cooperation between countries. And I'm really looking forward into the next centuries to see that the world is even growing closer together.
Thank you. Raymond?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank all the associations for all their work they do all the year, because for some they are full-time employees, but for some they do that, and for most I think besides their work, so they do that on a voluntary basis. And these events are very important. If I just look at the amount of people that we have here today, which all have similar problems, and so instead of everyone doing in their own corner their own thing, we can share the experiences, and these are really opportunities that can only be done via the help of those people. So a big thank you to all of the representatives from the different chambers. I think if I really want to find something that can be improved, it's maybe, but not for the chamber level, but more on the government or Chambre de Commerce level. It's there are a lot of times we do hand in, for example, our doléances, the issues that we see in certain countries. So be it administrative work in Russia or direct flight missing or here and there. But I feel that they do a very good work to put you in touch with several people and trade missions or stuff, but then the actual follow-up is a little bit missing. You do go there, you do get to know people, you do hand in what's wrong, but then it stops somehow there, and then it would be good sometimes to go to the next step, or at least even if it's not possible to do, because if a flight is not economically feasible, so be it, but just report it. Follow up on it, report it, and that's something I miss a little bit, because then otherwise the next year you restart at the beginning and there's no real, but okay, that's just to find something.
Yeah, you just mentioned it, having the Chamber of Commerce is present at Eurochambre, so does the work there, also organizes with the Ministry of Economy some of the missions, some of to the countries. There was a mission to Russia this year, I think. Yeah. Indeed. Heike, what would be your wish list?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we're very happy with the India Business Chamber, the various chambers of commerce, and also the way that Luxembourg has taken space in these international organizations. This summer, it was very convenient to just take the bus down to the Asia Infrastructure Investment Forum and host a panel, and there were 2,000 people around that were interested in Asia, rather than just traveling all the time as we do anyway. Luxembourg also, we have an opportunity with the Asia Development Bank, where Luxembourg is also present. So that is we like that a lot. I mentioned the ambassador. on the wish list, we have an official mission or a state visit to India. And I think there, Luxembourg, size-wise, is at a disadvantage. I guess it's hard to produce the appropriate counterparts at the appropriate levels there. But that's something that that would be nice.
So, to be developed. So we finish now with Joël for Intertrust.
Indeed. So I do agree with Stefan. I think we have to continue doing what it's done, but even more in an intensive way. In relation with Brazil, I was last year in the event organized by Luxembourg for Finance in Sao Paulo. It was a very successful event, by the way, and I think this type of events help. Putting Luxembourg, in the radar of many corporations and potential clients and companies for knowing Luxembourg even more. So I think indeed it's very important that from the different ministries and other administrative bodies there are close relations with the counterparties in Brazil. Of course, thanks to the job done by all the chamber of all the chambers and also from let's say the private side, companies like ours, but others that have interest or that go to Brazil to do regular visits, meetings there, and promote Luxembourg.
Thank you, Joël. Olga, do we take questions from the room, or do we do that at the drink?
Well, people are interested to have some questions, maybe a couple.
Of course.
Any questions in the room?
I just want to ask Raymond what you mentioned. I would want to ask you, what are the problems that you're having in India to set up your manufacturing in India?
So I would say one of the problems we had is that as far as I'm not now a specialist in Indian law, but from what I heard that for example, if you insist on having a majority stake in a joint venture in India, even by not having a majority percentage-wise of the shares, you still have a very high amount of power as the joint venture company, as the 49% company, local Indian company. And that's something which is, of course, not really in our favor because that's not the way we operate. The second point is the administrative work is really enormous. I mean, even if we just think about shipping something, our regular shipments to India, it's really, really a lot of paperwork. And unfortunately here in Luxembourg, you cannot afford to have to hire 10 people just to check what's being done in India. But at the beginning, no matter in which country we go, you have to at least in the two, three first years, you have to really keep an eye on what's going on because you don't know yet the people locally and the employees and everyone. But there's so much administrative work that you just cannot. And that were two hurdles that really, I wouldn't say they discouraged us, but since they were not as big in other countries, we were more in favor to go firstly to another country and waiting that these problems will become easier in India in the future.
I would say that let's talk it over afterwards and see how it could help you out.
With pleasure. Thank you.
Some other questions?
Thank you. I have a question to Stefan Grenks. I know your products, and you said it yourself, are extremely sensitive in the domain of research. You make a lot of research, a lot of investment to find solutions to very difficult products. As you mentioned, you went to China at the beginning for reasons of salaries, and today you are there because you're happy to supply the Chinese market. But to your experience, as it was mentioned before, also by Mr. Wirth, Michel Wirth, the problem of copying products. I have myself, I'm in a board of a company that's also in China where once there was a big issue with a product that was copied. How is your experience, if I may ask that?
Okay, let's say the answer firstly is the competition is growing fast in China. So I believe this answers already your question. The IP rights, or to save your IP rights in China is much more difficult than here. And actually, yes, we are struggling still with this, let's call it copying. It is an issue. But we are more or less in the lucky situation that we have products which are really complicated. It's really, up to now, still really difficult to copy. Our processes, all our processes are 100% customized. So this is an advantage, but also a disadvantage. So if we are bringing a new product to the market, so it takes us up to 2 years to develop the processes for it, and as well the materials. So there's more or less nothing besides some small parts of the list of material which you can just buy on the market. This keeps us still one step ahead. Let's call it like this. But it's for sure, it's a point we are always focusing on, and we keep the market and we're screening the market. And unfortunately, it still happens that we find more or less our products at small local manufacturers. And on the other hand, we are in a market, the automotive market, which is pretty strict in quality regulations. Just take the big brands. If you take Volkswagen, Audi, BMW, if you just stay now with the German brands, but still Chrysler, GM, they still work on a really trustful level with their suppliers. So for sure, they are squeezing them wherever they can to get it cheaper, but they would never go to a no-name company somewhere located wherever in the world to buy these products. But for sure, if you go to local brands, they are more open to do so. And it's just a question of time until they catch up, and then the competition is getting even bigger. That's still the situation.
Okay.
It's not you, but Mr. Paul Voort, not Paul Voort, Mr. Michel Voort, yes. He did an observation about the South African countries. We invited them. We never put them away from us. So it's an issue that is there any South African here, perhaps? No? Oh, you are a South African. So please distribute to your community the idea that we would like to have a representative of South Africa with us. We spoke with Mr. Cravat, which actually is the honorary consul, right? I spoke with him, and I invited him, and he said no. It was a plain, for whatever reason, I don't want to enter into the reasons, but it's not the situation. It's just a very small reminder that we did it. We invited them.
We have one then, the future.
The future. Yeah, so probably it's a suggestion for South Africans to create a chamber, and then it will be not BRIC event, but BRICS events. So it's for the future. Then for now, do you have any other questions? If not, then it's time to thank the panel and for very interesting, insightful discussion. Yes,
thank you.
And our official part is coming to the end. Once again, I would like to thank all the sponsors, the organizers, in particular, with whom I work together, Jacques Bartuso, sorry, Irina Bouchard, and then Sandy Sophie from China Lux. Then thank you all for the interest to the event. Thank you to the presidents, to all our speakers, to everybody who is there. We will have a cocktail tonight with the food of BRIC chambers, and it's time for networking. Okay, thank you all.